Representative Louie Gohmert of Texas filed a federal lawsuit on December 27th against Vice President Mike Pence in order to give Vice President Pence exclusive authority over the electoral votes that are to be counted on January 6th. Now, if I felt that this lawsuit had any chance of being accepted, I would call it dangerous, even deadly, to the Republic. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to drive off in a huff. I'm going to do my best to provide as many facts and as much logic as possible. Because we've all got questions. We just need to be a little better at thinking it through. What Gohmert is proposing, even demanding, which is what these lawsuits really are, is actually antithetical to the whole Republican premise, and I'm not referencing the party. The idea of a Republican form of government, which is what we are, is that we elect our officials. Us 300 plus million people have dispersed our trust into 538 legislators and one executive, not to mention our state and local officials. Now, whether we have misplaced that trust is a completely different matter. The problem that Gohmert addresses is a very real one, that the Electoral Count Act of 1887 actually gives ultimate power over a state's electoral votes, not to the Congress and not even to the state's legislature, but to its governor. This only happens, however, when more than one slate of electors is sent from its state. Unfortunately, there are 7 states that have sent dueling electors: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, New Mexico, and Wisconsin. Gohmert's lawsuit addresses only 5 of these states, sans New Mexico and Nevada. But how did the ECA, the Electoral Count Act of 1887, actually come about? It actually came about during the Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden election in 1876. The similarities between the 1876 and 2020 election are glaring. By the end of that election, it had all the markings of a Tilden landslide victory. He had won the popular vote by somewhere between 250 to 300,000 votes, and he was at 184 electoral votes, which was only one short of the majority at that time. And that was with 4 other states yet to be called. Those 4 states, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Oregon, had, unfortunately for Tilden, sent competing slates of electors. The first slate to be addressed was Oregon, which had 3 electoral votes at that time, and Hayes had actually won the state by approximately 1,000 votes. The top 3 vote-getters for the electorate in Oregon were Republican, but John W. Watts, who received the 3rd most votes, had been a postmaster, which according to Article 2 of the Constitution excluded him from being an elector. He actually resigned from this position due to this concern, and he did it before the Electoral College met, but he did it after the election had already taken place. Democrats pointed out that Watts could not be an elector because he was in violation of the Constitution, and that the 4th place vote-getter, E.A. Cronin, should be put in his place. Lafayette Grover, who was the governor of Oregon at the time, certified that Cronin would be the 3rd elector. Keep in mind, Cronin's vote would have given Tilden the presidency. The Republicans fought this because they said that Watts had actually resigned in time, since the Constitution did not specify when an elector could not hold an office of trust or profit under the United States, either before the election or before the Electoral College vote. Republicans also said that it was not the job of a governor to fill a vacancy left open in the electorate, but that was the job of the electors themselves. In fact, that's exactly what the other 2 Republican electors did. They took a vote and reinstated Watts as the 3rd elector. They added that the citizens of Oregon had spoken and that their voices should be represented accordingly. Watts remained an elector. Hayes went from 163 Electoral College votes to 166, and Tilden remained at 184. Regarding the other 3 states, Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana, which totaled 19 votes, the Democrat held House of Representatives and the Republican held Senate could not agree on who should get those votes. Republicans, similarly enough to 2020, actually accused Democrats of cheating while tallying the votes. Due to these disagreements, Congress created an electoral commission with the Act creating an electoral commission on January 29, 1877. And this was nearly 3 months after the election had taken place. Now, the commission was composed of 5 representatives, 5 senators, and 5 Supreme Court justices. The votes for the remaining 3 states all ended 8-7, all along party lines, and gave the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes, and Tilden remained at 184 votes. It was this controversy that brought about the convoluted Electoral Count Act of 1887. It's not a very long law, but it is very convoluted. 1877 to 1887, yes, it did take that long for Republicans and Democrats to agree on how to resolve these types of issues should they arise again. 133 years later, there is still some disagreement, and Gohmert has made that very clear. So what does Representative Gohmert get right in this lawsuit? What Gohmert gets right about the issues with the act is that it's the governor that is given the final say on which is the proper and regularly given slate of electors. According to the act and the U.S. Code 3, Section 15 on counting electoral votes in Congress, if the 2 houses shall disagree in respect of the counting of such votes, then, and in that case, the votes of the electors whose appointment shall have been certified by the executive of the state under the seal thereof shall be counted. The real problem is not the role of the vice president, but the role of the governor of a state, whose certification gives the finality of the vote, which is nowhere mentioned in the 12th Amendment, or even in the original 3rd clause of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. I add that only to express the framers' intent. The ECA, for all its intentions to correct a problem, unfortunately created another one. This affects Americans dramatically in the current crisis because the fate of the presidential election, and according to some, the fate of the republic, hinges on the certification of 7 individuals. Now, here are a few suggestions that could have helped produce a better outcome. It may have been more prudent for Congress to be authorized to send the electoral votes back to the state legislatures with a deadline to make a concise decision, or for the House and Senate to come to a final decision on their own, even if it meant tossing the votes out altogether. Tossing votes would at least make it easier to bring the vote to the House of Representatives as it did during the 1824 election, or even maintaining the election commission as a final alternative. So what does Gohmert get wrong in his lawsuit? What Gohmert gets wrong in his lawsuit is that he misinterprets the 12th Amendment that states, the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates and the votes shall then be counted. He follows this up by stating in his lawsuit that under the 12th Amendment, Pence alone has the exclusive authority and sole discretion to open and permit the counting of the electoral votes for a given state. And where there are competing slates of electors, or where there is objection to any single slate of electors, to determine which electors' votes, or whether none, shall be counted. The 49th Congress, which were the framers of the ECA, actually detailed what the role of the President of the Senate would be, which was primarily ministerial, yet not devoid of authority over the process. What they made clear during their more than a decade's worth of discussion was that the President of the Senate would not have sole authority over the electoral votes, nor did he have the power to toss votes or decide on their legitimacy carte blanche. Now, according to Professor Steven Siegel, no, not Steven Seagal, Steven Siegel, in his Congressman's Guide to the Electoral Act of 1887, he states, if the Senate President's role as presiding officer gives him power to influence the outcome of Congress's electoral count, it flows from 2 sources. 1, his ability to announce, when the joint session reconvenes, the decision reached by the House of Representatives and the Senate in their separate sessions, and 2, his ability to declare substantive objections and procedural motions out of order. In 1886, Representative Andrew Caldwell, who was the chairman of the House committee managing the ECA, stated that the act would decide, first, that the power to count the vote is not in the president of the Senate. Second, that it is in the two houses of Congress, not ministerially merely, not as witnesses, but with power to count and the consequent power to decide upon the legality of the votes to be counted. Third, that the action of the two houses shall be separate and concurrent upon all questions of content arising under the count, but joint as to results, thus preserving the dignity and rights of the two bodies by conceding to each equal and concurrent powers in counting and judging of the validity of electoral votes without merger of the lesser body into the numerically greater. If the president of the Senate was actually clothed in such immense power, then every re-election bid would be perilously open to the consent of one man, the current vice president. The conflict on its face should be enough to recognize that the framers of the 12th Amendment would not have intended that such power would be invested in one person. The Founding Fathers worked tirelessly to ensure that a king was never established through the executive, and that includes the vice president. Another thing Gohmert gets wrong in the lawsuit, though not textually, is that his complaint is about the executives of the states having a quasi-final say on their state's electors, while at the same time advocating for the nation's executive, and not even the top one, having the final say over any state's electoral votes. Now, I'm not certain if this is political gamesmanship or political nearsightedness. All is not lost in Gohmert's contestation. The 2020 election in these 5 states were fraught with irregularities and possible mass fraud. The governors filed their slate of Democrat electors while lawsuits were being filed, while state, Senate, and House hearings were being conducted, and while investigations were ongoing. These certifications may have been conducted prematurely, and according to Senator John Sherman, who helped pass the ECA, these certifications by the state's executives are merely prima facie evidence of the facts contained in it. It is not at all conclusive. In 1865, Congress passed the 22D Joint Rule, which allowed one house to reject a slate of electors without having the other house's agreement. This lasted until 1876. The year of the Hayes-Tilden election and the year the Democrats retook the House. This time, Congress had plenty of time, 133 years to be precise, to fix a glaring issue, but they decided to wait until past the last second. It is proof positive that Congress remains too busy creating laws instead of restructuring or repealing bad ones. And whenever they do notice a bad law, they seem to have little issue with requesting the courts legislate from the bench while at the same time condemning that very act. There is a lot to be learned from Gohmert's lawsuit. Unfortunately, we have a Congress that appears too busy to do such a thing. I'm Dustin Bass, and I've been thinking it through for the Sons of History.